For thousands of years, cities grew organically as living nodes of human communication. The demographic base dictated the architecture. People settled, and stone followed. But the 21st century inverted this fundamental law of urban physics. Today, developers erect the massive physical shell long before a single inhabitant arrives. Infrastructure precedes society. The scale of this modern anomaly defies traditional urban planning. Over 400 empty high-rises stand completely finished. This architectural mass equals the core infrastructure of a medium European city. Pouring over 1 million tons of concrete and laying 200 miles of subterranean piping creates a flawless, ready-to-use grid. The engineering networks achieve 100% readiness. Water pressure stabilizes in the mains. Power grids actively carry voltage to empty rooms. 0% social activity. A rigid network of empty avenues cuts through the landscape. Perfect symmetrical facades line the immaculate streets. Yet satellite thermal imaging reveals a sterile concrete polygon. There is a complete absence of human heat and light signatures. Zero permanent residence at launch. Construction detaches from human necessity, mutating into an independent, self-sustaining process entirely disconnected from reality. The sensory experience inside this zone is entirely unnatural. Acoustic emptiness dominates the environment. Wind reflects directly off millions of square feet of hardened concrete. There is no traffic friction, no low-frequency urban hum to absorb the sound waves, just the sharp echo of air hitting empty asphalt. Everything operates exactly as designed. A sprawling metropolis reduced to an isolated technical process. But a critical paradox remains. Can a perfectly engineered physical shell ever spark its own life? Or does an urban grid simply decay without a social core? The spatial paradox of 400 empty high-rises condenses into a hyper-specific architectural failure in northwestern Turkey. Here, the urban layout mutates into a relentless geometric copy-paste. During the early 2010s, excavators tore into the mountain valleys. The development strategy abandoned organic growth for pure architectural cloning. No dynamic zoning, no functional variety, just an industrial conveyor belt stamping out concrete forms. Construction crews poured uniform foundations. Cranes dropped identical roof sections into place. 732 individual houses emerge simultaneously. They form a rigid geometric grid stretching straight out beyond the horizon. Zero deviations. Every single facade is an exact clone. This repetitive subdivision consumes roughly 250 acres, a physical footprint larger than the entire territory of Vatican City. A massive $200 million financial engine drove this mass production. Then the foreign capital suddenly evaporated. The money vanished. The conveyor belt halted. Physical duplication cannot spark an urban ecosystem. A functional city demands mechanical complexity, mixed-use zones, commercial arteries, logistical variation. Stripping away that diversity to blindly replicate one specific residential template kills the life cycle before it even starts. Today, those 732 identical structures remain permanently locked in the mountains, a frozen assembly line completely devoid of a functional resolution. The architectural failure of 732 mountain villas is merely a localized anomaly. True systemic disproportion emerges when that same replication model scales up to a 14 square kilometer artificial megaproject in the Johor Strait. In 2014, foreign capital initiated a massive engineering assault on the Malaysian coast to build Forest City. Massive dredgers pump millions of tons of sea sand onto submerged reefs. The seabed shifts. 4 artificial islands rise directly from the water. 14 square kilometers of new territory materializes from zero. That is the exact surface area of central Geneva, fabricated entirely from scratch. Next comes the vertical extrusion. Tower cranes erect 400 high-rise residential blocks in synchronized waves. Asphalt seals expansive multi-lane highways. Capital converts into concrete at an unprecedented velocity, completely outpacing the natural rate of demographic absorption. A continuous mechanical hum from heavy construction and maintenance equipment echoes between the glass facades. No human voices interrupt the drone. The master plan dictates a dense urban ecosystem, but the physical reality delivers a structural void. The mathematical gap defines the failure. Planners engineered this colossal infrastructure to sustain 700,000 permanent residents. Over a decade later, the actual population barely reaches a few tens of thousands. Millions of constructed square meters dominate the skyline, yet over 650,000 projected inhabitants remain completely absent from the equation. The urban paradox extends far beyond Asian investment bubbles. In the Spanish market, the system experienced a brutal mandatory adaptation. Developers initially poured concrete for 13,000 housing units on the arid plains outside Madrid. The blueprint envisioned an overnight residential empire. Then came the financial crash of 2008. The global credit system froze. Capital streams vanished in days. Hundreds of massive brick structures stood entirely empty. The initial construction phase aggressively maximized residential square footage while completely ignoring secondary infrastructure. There were no rail links, no schools, no medical centers, just endless grids of identical facades absorbing the harsh solar heat. Years later, intense housing pressure in the capital finally forced families into these vacant shells. Today, over 15,000 people live inside the Cecina megaproject. The ghost town label gradually dissolved. Yet, this chronological shift reveals a fundamental engineering truth. Mechanically packing residents into concrete boxes does not automatically generate a functional urban ecosystem. The physical footprint of this development roughly equals the total area of Monaco. Retrospectively retrofitting this colossal expanse with missing social infrastructure demands a staggering financial toll. Crews now actively tear up existing asphalt to lay heavy utility networks. Planners carve new transit corridors directly through the rigid street geometry. Local authorities continuously scramble to integrate basic public services into an already finalized concrete environment. Moving beyond isolated speculative developments, planners attempted something far more radical on the outskirts of Hangzhou: absolute urban cloning. They did not just pour concrete to build housing blocks. They tried to manufacture an entire cultural matrix. Engineers built Tianducheng from the ground up to absorb 100,000 residents. But instead of adapting the infrastructure to local demands, the blueprint simply duplicated a foreign reality. Construction crews molded thousands of tons of plaster and stone to perfectly replicate Haussmann-style architecture. Wrought iron balconies precisely match their European counterparts. Grand avenues slice through the district in rigid geometric imitation. The facades project centuries of European heritage. Behind them lies a total social void. At the geographical core stands the ultimate anchor. A 108-meter replica of the Eiffel Tower pierces the skyline. The structure demands over 1,000 tons of steel, weighing as much as 3 fully loaded passenger jets. Wind howls through the heavy metal lattice, echoing across massive, vacant plazas. While a fraction of the target population eventually occupied some units years later, the initial reality exposed a brutal urban failure. Replicating the physical shell of a metropolis does not generate its pulse. Flawless limestone archways lead directly into dead zones devoid of local employment, social networks, or human traffic. The visual illusion shatters immediately upon ground-level inspection. Monumental wrought iron street lamps cast long, overlapping shadows across perfectly manicured, utterly deserted Parisian boulevards deep inside eastern China. If Tianducheng copied the form, South Korea's Songdo attempted to synthesize a flawless technological function from scratch. 53 square kilometers of new territory, zero natural ground. Dredging ships reclaimed every single square meter directly from the Yellow Sea. The master development timeline stretches from the early 2000s deep into the 2030s. $40 billion invested. Engineers created an artificial landmass roughly the size of Manhattan, designed entirely to operate as a unified living machine. Aerial views reveal pristine, multi-lane highways slicing through geometric glass canyons. The asphalt is flawless. The intersections calculate optimal flow. The perspective drops from the empty sky down to street level, glides past rows of networked streetlights, and plunges straight into the subterranean control nodes. Down here, the auditory landscape shifts violently. A relentless low-frequency hum of cooling fans and server racks fills the concrete bunkers. This mechanical vibration provides a jarring contrast to the absolute silence of the boulevards above. No car horns, no pedestrian chatter, just the steady thrum of industrial ventilation keeping the algorithms alive. The construction sequence intentionally reversed the natural evolution of human settlements. Crews laid down a vast nervous system of fiber optic cables and centralized data hubs long before pouring the foundations for residential towers. Trucks do not collect garbage in this district. Pressurized underground pneumatic tubes suck waste directly from individual apartments to central sorting facilities at 80 kilometers per hour. Millions of embedded sensors monitor microclimate shifts, energy grid loads, and water pressure. The central processors analyze terabytes of telemetry every second. The system calculated, adjusted, and reacted flawlessly. It was a digital utopia operating in a complete social vacuum. Today, the local population has slowly climbed to 160,000 residents. Organic human unpredictability is finally bleeding into the rigid grid. Yet the prolonged early years of this hyper-efficient network proved a fundamental urban law. Supercomputers can run perfect diagnostics, but without the messy, gradual layering of daily human routines, a city remains a sterile motherboard. Concrete, steel, and fiber optics simply outpaced human demographics. But while Songdo suffered from slow adaptation, engineers designed the Eco-Atlantic project in Nigeria from the start as a physical and economic barrier. Dredging ships pulled millions of tons of sand from the Atlantic Ocean to forge 9 square kilometers of artificial land off the coast of Lagos. That is a continuous slab of reclaimed territory roughly the size of 3 central parks. To shield these multi-billion-dollar investments from extreme storm surges, builders erected a massive defensive perimeter known as the Great Wall of Lagos. 100,000 concrete armor blocks locked together along the coastline. Each block weighs 5 tons. The barrier absorbs the brute kinetic energy of the sea. Marketing brochures promised a dense, thriving urban hub to cure the chaotic sprawl of the mainland. Instead, the advanced maritime protection creates an exclusive fortress. The division between the target financial elite and the local residents is absolute. A single square meter of this artificial real estate demands up to $4,000. Just across the water, an average worker in Lagos brings home less than $200 a month. 1 square meter equals 2 years of daily labor. This massive wealth gap strips the project of a natural social base. Global investors buy the luxury land, but the local population remains locked out by an invisible wall of pricing. The engineering holds the water back, but it totally isolates the city from human density. Heavy ocean swells crash against the interlocking concrete armor, throwing saltwater spray over the silent promenades of an underpopulated financial district. While a strict class divide dictated the physical isolation of Eco-Atlantic, the urban vacuum in the Chinese district of Kangbashi emerged as a direct consequence of raw material macroeconomics. Beneath the Ordos Basin lies 1/6 of the entire national coal reserve. In the early 2000s, a sudden surge in global energy demand triggered an unprecedented mining boom. Capital flooded the region. Local authorities immediately channeled this massive financial surplus into a radical geographic expansion. The logic relied on sheer economic momentum. Planners assumed that rapid structural deployment would automatically generate a labor market. Contractors converted tens of billions of dollars into raw concrete and steel. The master plan projected a rigorous grid designed for over 300,000 new inhabitants. Heavy machinery carved out the barren land. Construction crews poured foundations for immense municipal centers and sprawling commercial blocks. The Ordos Museum, a colossal copper-colored dome designed to resemble a polished desert boulder, anchored a central public plaza geometrically larger than the center of Beijing. Then the timeline reached 2010. The chronological shift from financial euphoria to physical reality exposed a severe developmental failure. The concrete framework was complete, but the social cycle lagged decades behind. A sweeping panorama of monumental theaters and grand municipal palaces abruptly yields to silent, uninhabited high-rises. The scale is completely hypertrophied. 6-lane transit arteries, engineered for maximum traffic volume, stretch into the horizon with 0 vehicles. Cold steppe wind sweeps across the fresh asphalt, howling between the glass facades of empty residential towers. Engineers constructed an infrastructural machine for hundreds of thousands, yet the starting population hovered at absolute zero. The flow of capital simply moved faster than the formation of human roots. A functioning municipality requires a layered ecosystem of stable employment, localized services, and generational settlement. This extreme disconnect between the speed of construction and the slow pace of human migration branded Ordos as the ultimate ghost town. The math of that first decade captured the true cost of outpacing the social cycle. The urban equation stabilized at $17 billion of raw infrastructural investment, serving a daily occupancy of barely 30,000 scattered residents. While the empty avenues of Ordos eventually absorbed a slow trickle of residents, megaprojects like Palm Jebel Ali demonstrate exactly what happens when global economic cycles simply freeze time. What happens to a man-made archipelago when the financial flow dries up? Engineers forced the ocean back to forge a completely new map. Launched in 2002, this architectural behemoth emerged on blueprints as a structure 50% larger than the original Palm Jumeirah. Heavy dredgers pumped millions of tons of crushed rock and ocean sand, shaping an artificial mass heavy enough to alter local sea currents. The master plan demanded a rapid assembly of luxury resorts and tens of thousands of homes directly on the newly reclaimed land. Unlimited geographical dominance. Then the capital vanished. Global markets abruptly hit the brakes and the heavy machinery stopped dead. For more than a decade, the artificial geography simply baked under the harsh sun. Millions of cubic meters of engineered sand slowly settled into the seabed. Unfinished earthworks hardened into barren ridges. Saltwater chewed at the raw edges of a massive crescent visible from orbit, yet totally devoid of human motion. Pure static material. Even backed by immense sovereign wealth, macro infrastructure stalls completely when the global economy stumbles. Time stops entirely. Developers finally initiated a cautious reboot of the groundwork phases in 2024. The new construction timeline operates through a strictly gradual execution, replacing the explosive speed of the past. Yet the vast outline in the water still stands as a monumental warning. The sprawling footprint remains locked in an unnatural void, suspended quietly between a colossal architectural promise and a stark physical reality. Financial cycles do not engineer every massive urban void. Sometimes, emptiness emerges organically, house by house, through relentless demographic collapse. Rainwater seeps through a decaying cedar roof in rural Hanshu. Damp wood splinters and yields under its own weight. Invasive bamboo shoots physically pierce the concrete foundation of a once pristine family home. Absolute silence settles over entire residential blocks. The wind rattles loose aluminum window frames, carrying no human voices. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the surviving younger population packs tightly into the sterile, hyper-dense residential grids of Tokyo. The physics of this vacuum operates on a terrifying scale. According to the 2023 Housing and Land Survey, Japan holds exactly 9 million empty properties. The Japanese call them akiya. 9 million dead structures. That equals the structural equivalent of an entirely extinct metropolis the size of New York City, scattered across the archipelago. These forgotten homes account for 13.8% of the nation's total housing stock. This spatial void does not stem from speculative excess or poor architectural planning. It represents pure demographic gravity. A country physically shrinks. Japan loses over 800,000 citizens a year to old age and flatlining birth rates. Communities compress. Younger generations migrate to primary metropolitan hubs, severing legal and physical ties with their ancestral properties. The built environment simply outlasts the society it was designed to shelter. The Nomura Research Institute projects a severe acceleration of this collapse. By 2038, nearly 30% of all Japanese homes will stand completely hollow. A highly developed nation physically contracts, leaving fully functional power grids and paved transport routes to service millions of addresses that have already vanished from the demographic map. While Japan slowly empties under the weight of an aging demographic, China engineers its voids artificially. Emptiness here serves as a rigid concrete reservoir, standing strictly on standby for an industrial boom that chronically delays. Dredgers carved the Chaofidian district from the coastal waters and grafted it onto the Hebei shoreline. Planners executed a preemptive sequence: pour the asphalt, erect the high-rises, energize the power grid. Engineers designed the fundamental architecture to support an ultimate capacity of 500,000 to 1 million inhabitants. They built the physical shell first, betting that heavy industry, port logistics, and commercial gravity would instantly follow. The timeline fractured. The 2020 census recorded exactly 350,000 residents. This creates a severe technical gap between structural readiness and actual utility. 10-lane municipal expressways, engineered to absorb the relentless friction of heavy commuter fleets, span across the district, yet they carry the traffic volume of a quiet rural outpost. outpost. The sheer volume of the built environment outpaces the human reality by a factor of 3. Residential towers stand fully wired, substations hum with high voltage, water mains maintain perfect operational pressure, but housing infrastructure alone cannot spontaneously generate an economy. Without a critical mass of factories and daily human friction, the urban core fails to ignite. Traffic signals cycle from red to green over completely empty intersections. The sprawling structural grid simply idles in neutral, actively burning energy while waiting for a life that refuses to arrive. While Calphidian miscalculated the timeline of heavy industry, the district of Chenggong exposes a deeper systemic bug in administrative master planning. Planners designed it as a massive release valve for the congested core of Kunming. The capital of Yunnan province was choking, so they engineered a parallel center. Cyclopean government buildings cast massive shadows over endless plazas. Not a single pedestrian breaks the sightline. Across the sprawling university sectors, the sharp crack of solitary footsteps echoes against glass facades, instantly swallowed by the sheer volume of empty space. The geometry is too aggressive. By the year 2023, over 700,000 people lived in Chenggong. That is the equivalent of dropping the entire population of Seattle into a newly poured grid. Yet the district remains functionally dead. The core failure lies in the sequence of development. Bureaucrats built the administrative bases, the university campuses, and the giant residential blocks before establishing the daily patterns of commerce. They engineered the shell without the engine. 700,000 residents completely dissolve into the exaggerated dimensions of the urban plan. A 20-lane avenue separates residential towers from transit hubs, forcing a 30-minute march across exposed pavement just to reach a grocery store. People sleep here, they commute, but urban intensity does not exist. The streets handle traffic but generate zero social friction. The chronological timeline was completely inverted. The local government injected over $40 billion into primary infrastructure and concrete before a single private business signed a lease. Chenggong is not an isolated structural glitch. It operates as the final projection of a global macroeconomic symptom. What happens when an architectural shell arrives decades before its social core? Historically, urban evolution followed a strict biological rhythm. People gathered, trade routes formed. Only then did the foundations rise. Ancient metropolises required over 1,000 years to weave their complex economic networks. Modern master plans attempt to compress this entire demographic evolution into 60 months of continuous pouring. Time feels completely suspended over these megaprojects. A heavy, sterile stillness settles across perfectly paved 6-lane avenues and tens of thousands of untouched balconies. The transnational nature of this phenomenon forces a fundamental shift in macroeconomics. The definitive metric of urban viability is no longer the sheer volume of structural steel. It is not the total footprint of administrative zoning. The ultimate criterion is absolute habitability. Concrete merely provides the physical framework. Human density and social ties construct the actual urban machine. When physical expansion radically outpaces the human experience of space, the resulting infrastructure is not simply empty. It is a city that has not found its time.